Hi, I'm Johnny from ultimatepapermache.com, and I did a little experiment last week. I wanted to make some castings, and I had been thinking about learning how to make resin castings, but someone reminded me that a lot of resin is kind of toxic, and you have to use silicone molds, which are really expensive. But I remembered that I have made some things that I really like out of Li Qua Che. This is what I made this week, and Li Qua Che is this stuff here. It's a pourable paper mache, but I haven't used it for a really long time. The last thing I used it for was the Lodge Brother. That's one of my favorite sculptures, actually. I really like him. I actually made him after I made this one. And there is a video about the Wolfman. And I made the Lodge Brother because this guy was just a little bit, kind of in a bad mood, and I didn't think I wanted to live with him. Before that, actually before I even had a video camera, so it was over 10 years ago, I made these Christmas ornaments using Li Qua Che. It's just really easy. You pour the stuff into plaster molds. The plaster molds are really inexpensive, and you can make multiple copies really fast. And what I've been recently thinking about doing is making some more story plaques, I think I'm calling them. I made this one out of plaster years ago. That I used a silicone mold and poured plaster into it, which works. But they do end up being pretty heavy. But I really did enjoy illustrating the story. I just think that was a lot of fun, and I want to do some more like that. I have a couple of grandnieces, really little. One of them was just born, the other one is only 2 years old. And I thought about making little animal faces for them, but then I thought, it was so much fun illustrating the nursery rhyme that I want to do some more of those. And I want it to be reasonably inexpensive and easy to paint. These little bunnies that I made, these are really experimental, and the reason I had to experiment before making anything, that I really want to keep is because I haven't used this for a really long time. The only videos I could find, I think there were 2 by a teacher and 1 from me. No, that's the only Li Qua Che videos that I could find out on YouTube. Maybe there's more, but I just couldn't find them. I don't know why Activa doesn't make some. They don't come, the product itself doesn't come with any instructions. So I just wanted to kind of play around with it to make sure that I knew what I was doing again before I start creating something that I really want to keep. I did actually make 2 of these, and I'm just going to put them back in the bucket when this video is done, and they'll absorb the water, and this material can be used for my permanent one. It isn't waterproof, so if you don't like what you ended up with the first time, just throw it back in the bucket and you can use it for the next one. The little bunny face that I made to experiment with was made with WED clay, but for my story plaques, I'm going to use an oil-based clay that David Lemon recommends. It's called NSP Soft, and the reason that I'm going to be using this instead of the WED clay is just because I had a really hard time getting really fine details. I do love the WED clay. That's what my fast faces are made of, this guy here. When you're doing something that's really fast or big, or something that you need to, something where you'd really like to move things around and get an expression and change things a lot, the WED clay is really nice. But for something this small and detailed, I think that the oil-based clay is going to work a lot better. I sculpted the bunny right on top of a plastic cutting board, so it was nice and flat, and then I used some sign-making corrugated plastic sheets. You get them from Lowe's or get them online. You could use foam board too. And then I held the sheets together with masking tape and hot glue, and that made the wall that's going to keep the plaster from running all over the floor. I probably didn't need the tape to hold it onto the table since I already had used the hot glue, but I went ahead and did it anyway, just in case. Then I mixed up some plaster using the package directions, but I didn't make enough, and that was my first problem. It really did cause problems later because I should have been tapping the table to dislodge the bubbles that stick to the surface of the clay model. But when I was supposed to be doing that, I was actually out in the kitchen scrambling around to get the equipment to make some more plaster because I didn't have enough to fill it up. And that meant that a couple of small bubbles held on when the plaster was starting to set up. They're just really tiny right around the nose and the mouth, and they're easy to fix on the final Li Qua Che casting, but a good mold doesn't have any bubbles in it. So that was totally my fault. After it was hard, I pulled the clay out and then let the mold dry for several days. And I cleaned it up as well as I could so that there isn't any of the wet clay in there. And then I poured the Li Qua Che into it. You don't need any release. As a matter of fact, you don't want a release because you need the plaster to stay really porous. But I could tell that the Li Qua Che wasn't as creamy as it was when I used it several years ago. I tried it anyway, and it did actually work. Then you have to let it sit there for 5 to 10 minutes so that the plaster pulls the water out of the Li Qua Che. It'll make a thin shell right next to the plaster mold. And then you pour this still wet material from the inside of it back into the bucket and scrape off any of the extra Li Qua Che that's sitting on top of the mold, because that makes it easier to get the casting out after it's fully dry. It did take a long time to dry, and I'm not sure if it was because maybe the plaster itself wasn't quite dry, maybe my house isn't warm enough, maybe the plaster mold wasn't big enough. I'm not really sure why it took so long, but I did have to leave it overnight. And when it's completely dry, you can pull it out of the mold and it creates a perfect casting. It will catch every single detail that you have in your original sculpture. But I still wanted to see if the Li Qua Che would work better if I added some water to it. So I took a break from the alpaca and from painting the kitchen, which I'm also doing at the moment, and I mixed just a few spoonfuls of water into some Li Qua Che, and I made another casting. It worked just as well. I can't actually say that it worked better. It looks exactly the same to me. So that was my experiment. Now that I have reacquainted myself with this material, I do hope to make some story plaques. Now when I do make those plaques, I will reinforce the back of the Li Qua Che with some paper mache clay. That's what I did with the Wolfman and the Lodge Brother, because the Li Qua Che is not, well, the paper mache is just so strong, and this really isn't. Just to make sure, I'm going to put the paper mache clay on the inside of it, and I think that'll make it a lot stronger. And then the Li Qua Che itself is going to be really easy to paint. This is really lovely material for painting. I'm really looking forward to it. I don't usually look forward to painting anything, but I think that'll be kind of fun. So if you have any ideas for what nursery rhyme or story that children would be familiar with, something old enough so that I wouldn't run into any copyright problems, please let me know in the comments down below, and maybe in the next month or so I'll start working on that. Alpaca should be done next week. I also have an experiment that I want to do with paper mache clay that I'm really looking forward to. I have the materials. I've had the materials actually for about a couple of months, and I just haven't had time to do it. So we've got a lot of stuff coming up. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. Then go make something and come visit me, ultimatepapermache.com. I'll see you there.